In the workshop, a Warco lathe. Part 1. Taking a look at a second-hand Warco WM180 lathe that I bought from a friend to use in my smaller workshop. This lathe is a 2012 model. It is in good condition and appears to be quite well made. This lathe is perfect for the application I need it for. Here is its specification. I'm not going to read the list out, and yes, it is going rather fast, but you can pause or slow the video down. The main thing about this lathe is that it has a 3.5-inch centre height, like my Boxford in my main workshop. It has a 3-inch Morse taper in the headstock and a 2-inch Morse taper in the tailstock. It's not in perfect condition, but mechanically it's very good indeed. It belonged to a friend of mine who is an electronics engineer, and it really hasn't done much work. The only swarf around the machine seems to be either aluminium or brass. It does have some design quirks. For instance, this flap is a bit unnecessary. You lift it up to gain access to the spindle. Time to look inside and see how it's put together. It doesn't have a gearbox, it just has change wheels, but I will never be using it for screw cutting, so their only function is to move the auto traverse at the correct speed. I also have a box full of different size change wheels that came with the lathe, and some other interesting tooling which I'll show in the next episode. The drive belts look a bit on the thin side, but they've never been changed. I think the only problem my friend had was the circuit board for the speed control went early on in its life, and he got a replacement and changed it. When I rotate the parts manually, everything does feel rather good, with no discernible play in the bearings anywhere. This machine does have safety features. This one on the inside of the cover presses this plunger, which lets the power through when it's depressed. At first the lathe would not work. It will only work by depressing the button that I've just shown you and dropping the guard. The speed goes from nothing to round about 3000 RPM. The lathe is a little bit noisier with the cover removed. I will be replacing this shortly. It's quite a useful function having a knob to turn to set the speed. And as far as I can tell, all of the main parts of the lathe run very sweetly. I won't know about its accuracy until I test it. That won't be in this episode. What I'm doing at the moment is lubricating the change wheels, and I'm using superheater steam oil for this. It's like very thick, sticky oil, and I find it really good for this job. I've used it for years, and none of my change wheels in any of my machines are worn. After lubricating the change wheels, I ran the lathe at a high speed to spin off the surplus and then wiped it away with a cloth. I really don't need this lathe to do a lot of work. In the workshop that's built onto my house, I generally only do light-duty jobs. Turning and general machining is done in the main workshop. I have 3 lathes in there, a large Smart & Brown 1024 model, a Myford ML7R, and an old Boxford. Sometimes I have found that when working in this workshop, I do need to do some very light lathe work, so this is ideal. This is not really a mini lathe. I don't like those at all because they're very small. Here I'm having a look at the controls and everything seems fine. The big red knob on the top is the main cutoff that completely kills power to the machine. I really should know better, and I was surprised when the lathe didn't work until I dropped the guard like this. Now as you see, it works fine. I know that I mentioned this a short while ago in the video, but this shot shows a more comprehensive look at the controls. With the guard in place and the green button pressed, it's just a simple case of setting the speed that you want with this knob on the front. As I'm operating some of the controls, you may see the lathe physically move in this video. That's because it's not yet bolted down. When I first wind the knob to maximum, the lathe does not run at 3000 RPM, as it says in the specification. It does actually reach 3000 or just over once it's warmed up slightly. Here I'm slowing the machine down and then I press the red knob to shut it off. This will be a very useful polishing speed. These are the sort of jobs that I do in this workshop. I'll be using it to make small washers and spacers a bit of threading and a slight amount of turning. In this clip you can see the main body of the lathe moving. I will bolt it down shortly. I may even put it on foam pads like my Myford. I got two tailstock chucks with it. One of them is a bit beaten up and the other one isn't. The thing is, when I look closely at these two chucks, the one on the right doesn't fully close, which limits the smaller drill sizes I can use in it, but the one on the left fully closes. The capacity on these chucks is not as great as the ones in the main workshop, but they will be fine for what I need them to do on this machine. This is the tailstock, and everything about it is quite substantial for the size of the machine. This is the top slide, and I'm just having a feel at everything to make sure that it's not rattling about. You can see movement, but as I've already mentioned, the lathe isn't bolted down. That's the entire lathe moving. The handles fitted to the hand wheels were all loose on the tailstock, the cross slide and the saddle. This is no good. I could just tighten them, but I think they'd work loose again. So the idea is to remove them. This one's actually a bit bent. Before refitting this handle, I straightened the bent bolt, but I didn't show it in the video. After cleaning the bolt thread and the part where it fits, I'm using some Loctite 243. This is thread locker. It's not a retainer. It's not a thread sealant. It is, as it says on the bottle, a thread locker. Once you tighten a bolt using this thread locker, it tends not to work loose unless you put a bit of pressure on the screw to undo it. You don't need to use gallons of this stuff, just a smear on the thread, and as you tighten the thread into the hole, the thread locker compound gets spread evenly over both of the threads on the bolt and in the hole. These Loctite products are generally anaerobic adhesives, and they actually cure when deprived of air. With all the handles tight, it's time to test the functionality of the lathe. One big problem with lathes is wear on the bed, in the area where you do most of the turning, and that's what I'm looking for at the moment, and I'm pleased to say there isn't any. The saddle feels the same all the way down the bed. The cross slide is silky smooth. The top slide I've tightened up slightly because I don't want that to rattle about. In this clip I'm going to run the lathe at full speed and test the traverse, and it seems to work perfectly well. When I bought this lathe, my friend and I lifted it from a trolley into the back of the car. When I looked at getting it out of the car the next day, I had to give it some thought. It weighs 60 kilograms, which is about 9.5 stones. I am approximately 2 months from being 71. I'm not happy about this, but life goes on. And I'm definitely not as strong as I used to be. The lathe weighs 60 kilograms. I weigh 123 kilograms. So I sat and thought about it for a while. I removed the lightweight aluminium end cover, put a towel around the end of the spindle so I could grip that part of the lathe with my left hand. Then I moved the saddle to the right hand side of the lathe. Then as a test I picked it up and thought about it. Yes, it was heavy, but it needs to go into the house, so I just carried it in through the front door, through the kitchen and into the workshop. By the way, at this stage I'd like to mention, from experience I do know how to lift things, because in my mid-teens I used to do quite a bit of weightlifting for fun. And in my early 20s I used to do gigs with a Hammond C3 organ that weighed 450 pounds. And so far I have not yet had a hernia. That is it for this first episode. More to come, including testing the lathe and fitting a quick change tool post. Stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists you can actually watch the videos back to back.